I always loved, I always loved sports broadcasting. I would watch games as a kid. I was enthralled by sports. I was mesmerized by it all, and I loved watching the broadcast, but not so much. I mean, obviously, I looked up to the athletes and I wanted to emulate them, but I really did love the broadcasters. I would pretend to be the broadcasters. I would try to copy their style when I would play basketball. On my driveway with my friends and my brothers, I would pretend to do post game interviews and things of that nature. And I always loved just like the glitz and glamour of it all and the television, the magic and all that stuff. I love traditional sports, but I also love combat sports. So initially I loved pro wrestling and I loved the characters and the build up. I also loved boxing. And would go to my friend's house to watch the big events and whatnot. And eventually I stumbled upon mixed martial arts. I remember watching UFC 1 on delay. My grandparents had one of these like illegal pay-per-view boxes and they would replay it over and over again. And so I watched it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's kind of like pro wrestling. It's kind of like boxing, but it's just crazy. You got like a sumo wrestler and a kickboxer and all this stuff. But to be honest, back then, it was very hard to like actually follow MMA. No one was covering it. And,
Mhm.
you never really knew when the events were showing up. There was no internet and all that stuff. So it was tough, but I always kept my eye on it and tried to, follow it as much as possible. And so I remember being in the ninth grade. I was in English class, and it was Mrs. Blitt Hanson's English class, and we were supposed to be reading a textbook of some kind. And inside the textbook, I had an issue of Sports Illustrated, and it happened to be an issue where they were talking about the best schools in America for X, Y, and Z. And I remember seeing a little blurb where it said that Syracuse University produced the best sports broadcasters. If you want to be a sports broadcaster, you go to Syracuse University because the likes of Bob Costas and Marv Albert, two of my favorites, went there. So in my
Mhm.
mind, I was like, oh my gosh, Syracuse University, that's where I need to go. So I remember telling my parents I want to go to Syracuse University, but I was still, a few years away from that. And in my community, that wasn't a thing that we did. Like you don't actually leave um, Montreal to go to school. It's not a thing that you do. You just kind of stay